Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
All right. Hello, I'm Sara, the Michigan Chamber's Chief Communications and Marketing Officer, and your host today. We're going to be talking about an issue that's pretty near and dear to me, and one that our guests are pretty passionate about too. And that's how to foster and increase civility in policy and politics in today's increasingly polarized climate. We're lucky to have the following three leaders with us today: Jim Holcomb, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber, and my boss. Rudy Hobbs, now a partner at Michigan Legislative Consultants, a multi-client lobbying firm, a former state representative and co-director of the bipartisan Michigan Political Leadership Program, or MPLP at MSU, and a Democrat. And Tonya Schuitmaker, an attorney, former state rep and senator, and the other MPLP co-director, and a Republican. So we got a lot to talk about, so let's dive right in. We talk about polarization in today's political climate, and we hear about it all the time, how divided we are, both in the state and nationally, and that it's never been stronger or more divided. I'll start with you, Jim, about kind of like where you sit as an association leader. How does that play into what you do? And then Rudy and Tonya, from your standpoint, after we do that, like you've both recently served in the state legislature. Has our policy's ability to get things done changed, increased, lessened, or is about the same? So I guess, Jim, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks. I think as I look at it from an association perspective, the biggest impact is the inability to get something done in the legislative process, even when people agree, because it all breaks down about political lines. For the vast majority of Michiganders, I kind of look at it, I think we're like a bowling alley. You have a gutter on the left, a gutter on the right, roll the ball down the middle, you get some pins, and every now and again you get a strike. And I think that's where the majority of the public is, but when we get into the process, it becomes about political wins and losses. We used to run elections to argue about policy and elect people to lead a policy agenda. Now we run elections to get power to lead a political agenda. And I think it's what's pulling people apart, because we focus more on the political win instead of the policy objective.
Right. And I think from you two serving in the legislature, how do you feel about that? And what do you think, given the dynamics of today?
Well, I'll start. I think life's all about relationships, and so it's really fostering those relationships. When I was in office, and we all have our own vantage point, but I served with both the Republicans and Democrats. I've served both in majority and minority, and I think it's about fostering those long-term relationships. So I think that the longer you have people that have formed relationships that understand and can really, you elect people that can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that's really the heart of civility. And so I think it's really about solving the people's problems and coming to work every day with that perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I want to, kind of talk to Jim's, remarks too. But, because I would say, Jim, everybody runs on an agenda, right?
Oh, yeah.
So when you get to Lansing or you get to D.C., that's the agenda that you're going to try to implement, right? Mm-hmm. When you get elected, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, right? And that's been happening for a long time. Mm-hmm. JFK had an agenda. Ronald Reagan had an agenda, right? And so I think what happens, though, is that, nowadays it seems that people are less likely to open up their agenda for amendments, mm-hmm. right? And I think that's kind of where we don't get a chance to really kind of roll that ball down the middle or even to the right or the left mm-hmm. of the center, right? That ball is rolling sometimes in those gutters, that are right and left. And so I think that's kind of like has been a difference is, people, not agreeing to open up their agenda for any amendments. And I think that's the part that, that really kind of rubs a lot of people when it comes to politics.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think I'm hopeful that now that our legislators can serve longer, that, as Tonya said, the rapport and the relationships, and you can learn to trust somebody, because you can't really work with somebody if you don't trust them. You can't trust them unless you get to know them. And we need our legislators to get to know each other on a personal level about what their kids do, where are they from, what's their background. So when you're evaluating a policy, say, oh, I understand your perspective. This is how you grew up or where you lived or whatever the issue is. And I think it opens up better conversations.
You know what? That's a great point. We're going to skip ahead. So that term limits reform that passed overwhelmingly this last November. How do you feel about that? Do you think it can help move the ball on this needle because of those changes?
Yeah, I definitely think having longer to get to know people that are elected to represent the people of the state of Michigan will bring about better problem solving. And then, I think one of the other reasons why we're having such a degradation is, I think, even though social media has been great in terms of getting out people's message, it also prevents people, really harbors people to just take it down to a gutter and a level that people would never say face to face. And so I think
sometimes that anonymity.
Sometimes social media is great, but other times I think that's another reason why that and political pundit shows. I think that has rewarded bad behavior as well. And so I think it's important, with programs like MPLP, that we focus on civility.
Yeah, I think it's going to help a great deal, actually. Kind of being here for 12 years. And I think it's not necessarily from the member, relationship, but it's also the member in associations, right? It gives associations, lobbying firms, because the legislators don't operate in a vacuum, right? They're not the only players in Lansing. There are some other large voices. And it gives, unions an opportunity to start building relationships with Republicans. Right. It gives, Republican leading associations to start building relationships with Democrats, because at the end of the day, all these people come together to make legislation, and I think that's going to be the real secret sauce here. It's not the member to member. Look, I served only 4 years, Pete McGregor, Lisa Lyons. I mean, these are still some of my really good friends. And I only had like 2 years to really build that relationship with them. Right.
Yeah.
So it's not really the member to member piece. It's really all the other outside influencers, too.
I think it does, to your point, though, about opening up for amendment, I think it does allow for that more, because if I come here and I only have 6 years and I have 2 or 3 things that I really want to get done, I'm focused on that, and I'm not learning other issues. I'm not delving in. I'm not utilizing my relationships to be exposed to something else going on in the state. And I think that time frame just allows for more opening of agenda and allows people to actually become an issue expert. Right. You don't, far too often before now, you could have a committee chair, the first time they ever held a gavel is their first meeting ever in the legislature, and you're saying, hey, go ahead and, be in charge of tax policy or whatever the issue. Welcome to the legislature, you're in charge. And that's just not, through no fault of that person, it's just not going to lead to the best outcome, because they're going to be learning on the job.
It's just going to be like a whole lot of presentations from the time they take the gavel to the end of the year.
Exactly.
Well, I think that provides a perfect segue, and it takes us back to something that Tonya said earlier about solving the people's problems. So there are some challenges clearly facing the state. You look at road funding, that sticky widget, right, of like actually truly getting a long-term fix. The state's K through 12 education system, all of those challenges. Do you think enhanced civility can actually help them? Is it essential, or is that overrated?
I definitely think it can happen. Road funding, education, that is not a Republican or Democrat issue. That is something that every Republican and every Democrat hopefully wants for the next generation, and their current roads on their way to work. And so I definitely think that if people get together, I think there's more that unites us than divides us. And especially on issues like that, there's several issues out there that Republicans and Democrats are just frankly going to probably disagree upon. But roads and education and a lot of the problems facing the state of Michigan, and I would venture to say it's only about 10% of where there's ideological differences. The other 90% can really be solved.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I go back to this piece where if you have 12 years to be here in Lansing, right, now you have an opportunity to build relationships with, the lobby corps, with associations, particular unions, right? I mean, all these people have very large voices, in Lansing. And so having that longer runway, building those relationships, I think you can tackle big problems when you have time to, spend on those issues and learning those issues, building the relationships. But if we have to start the clock over, literally every, 6 years, and I would even go so far to say every 4 years, you're starting the clock over because you're getting a whole new group of leaders in here, right? I mean, it just kind of takes us backwards. We're never able to get ahead and really build those relationships to tackle the tough problems.
Yeah, I think what you were saying earlier, too, that we need to make sure people are engaged. And I think the civility, it's not just the voices of the legislatures or the lobbyists, it's the general public. And far too many people are pulling out and they aren't engaging. So they won't go to that local meeting back at home, the town hall, because they're scared that if they say something, they're going to get canceled. They don't want their neighbor to be mad at them. They don't want to go to church and have somebody angry with them. And like Tonya was saying, we have to learn to disagree without being disagreeable. It's fine to have a different opinion. The only way we're really going to get to a solution is if people debate. And unfortunately, social media, I think, is really causing a big problem, because if you can get heckled on Twitter and you get canceled, people are like, you know what? I'm just going to pull out. I'm going to keep my opinion to myself. I'll talk about it at home with my family, and that's it. And we're losing a lot of good perspective because we aren't engaging the people who the legislators are actually supposed to be serving.
And to that point, I've seen in my own party, a legislator takes a vote of conscience on one particular issue and crosses over, and the grassroots wants to cancel them. And so that's why we need good people that have kind of a level, moderate head to get involved, stay involved, and really focus on okay, we're not all going to disagree. I don't agree with my husband all the time, but we work through our differences and our problems, and so that's really why good people still need to stay involved.
Yeah, we can't vacate the field of discussion. Far too many people are doing that.
Okay. I think this one is from both of you, both serving and in the roles that you have had now and all the varying points. What do you say that the core tenets are that you follow to help foster kind of this civility?
I like to think. I mean, others can disagree, of course. But I like to think I'm really good at building relationships, and I never really confused civility and partisan politics, right? Those are two separate things to me. I remember being a floor leader for the Democratic caucus in the House. Jim Stamas was the majority floor leader. Now look, Jim, partisan politics, I would sit in Jim's office for about an hour, and it was probably like 15 minutes. I shouldn't say an hour. Yeah. We spent 40 minutes kind of chit-chatting about family and things like that nature. But then when it really got down to business, it was 15 minutes because Jim was like, this is what's going to happen this week, right? There was no room for me to share what was going to happen at all, right? But Jim, did their partisan agenda, and that was fine. But on the back end, Jim and I, our wives and I would get together for dinner, at least once a quarter. Jim, would come down to my house. We went up to Midland. I mean, that's civility, right? Mm-hmm. We were friends. We can work together. And I was able to separate the two, So, from my perspective, I think that, when I think about civility, I think about the relationship. And that's one of the things I've been really good at building, and is relationships. I don't take it personal because it's not personal. They were elected to run on a certain agenda. I get that. You got more votes than we did, and that's fine. You have a majority. It's going to flip one day, right? And it did. So,
I was texting with Rudy at 4 a.m. when it did flip. He's like, you're kidding me. So I just would add on to Rudy's comments, and I would say that Rudy's great at relationships, and that's one of the things we teach at MPLP. But also, understanding that everyone needs to treat everyone with respect. And if you treat people with respect, civility follows. And that's why we purposely go out of our way at MPLP really to get a diverse class so that everyone is not thinking alike, so that everyone learns, we need to be respectful of others' differences of opinions. I, as an attorney, would always go into court, argue my case out, to the nth degree, but then, hopefully walk out with every attorney as a friend.
Yeah, I think it's just like anything else. It's by example. We got into this problem because we had bad examples. Mm-hmm. Social media exacerbated it. We have all these examples of people acting inappropriately and negatively. I think the same way the pendulum swings back because we have people in positions to be seen that do it by example.
Okay. I think that's a great point, and I think that gets us to our closing question, because boy, did that go by fast already. So with our last question here, how would you say, from the standpoint of broader, systemic change, of truly getting this civility and pragmatic problem solving, if you will, what can different communities and citizens actually do to improve the process and our discourse? Who wants to tackle that one first?
I'll say for me, from a community standpoint, I think it is about engagement. Whether you're a business owner, whether you're a union member, whether you're a school board member, just an average citizen not serving them, people need to be engaged. They need to bring their perspective and their voice to the table. And I think the more we can get people re-engaged in the process, that will lead to the outcomes we want.
And I would just agree with that, but also put a shameless plug in for MPLP, that we take the next generation of political leaders and bring them together. We are very bipartisan, and we build leadership skills, we build relationships, and we make a great deal of public policy in terms of our program.
That was a really good plug, Tonya.
Yeah, thank you. Feel free to add on to it. Actually, Rudy was an MPLP grad. We've had over 700 leaders that have gone through MPLP. So
I should have made that plug.
Yeah,
right? You beat me to it. That's awesome. I guess I would say, it takes leadership, in this space. Like, I think that our state representatives, our state senators, our elected leaders need to create safe spaces for people to be able to come out and say what they need to say, right? When you see somebody doing wrong, you have to call it out. You have a voice. You were elected to lead. When you think about a state rep district and it's about 65,000 people, like 65,000 people, you're the one out of that district, right? So when you're at these, these coffees or community groups and you see people out there, behaving badly, you have to call it out, period. And I think that, as associations, I think as lobbyists, I think all those other wraparound organizations that support, or have voices here in Lansing, it's our job to call that out. And I think having the training programs, I think is also awesome too, but I really do think it's about leadership.
I think all great points. I thank you all so much. Boy, seriously, went by super fast. And this is an example of, I think, being able to have those differing opinions come together. So with that, we are out of time. A very special thanks to Jim, Tonya, and Rudy, and to you all for listening.
Awesome.
Make sure you turn into our next episode on all the latest happenings at the state capitol. Until then.